All right, good morning, afternoon, or good evening, everyone. We're so excited to have all of you here with us for our fourth annual offering of our Future M.D.s in STEM summer program. So we have our guest speaker here today with us, which is so exciting. And we also have closed captioning on, and we're live streaming to our YouTube channel, which is MedStem Powered Info, if you need to watch along there. So I'm just going to share my screen quickly with some reminders about our guest speaking session, and then we'll get started, okay? All right.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds wonderful.
Okay.
I'll share my screen briefly and then we'll dive right into the guest speaker session. Okay, so these are just some brief reminders for everybody throughout the program as we do guest speaker sessions. I'll wait for it to load. So first off, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. If you'd like to turn your camera on, you're more than welcome to. It's absolutely not a requirement for doing the program, but if you'd like to do it, we'd love to see all of your beautiful faces. It helps us connect with you guys a little bit better, but again, totally not required if you're not comfortable with it or you're not able to. So just some reminders, when our guest speaker is talking, we are not. Please make sure you remain on mute. If we have some time at the end for questions, you're more than welcome to raise your hand virtually if you have a question and we'll call on you and then you can of course unmute then. But just for right now, please make sure that you're staying on mute so that we don't interrupt our guest speaker who's taking time out of her day to come speak to us. And then make sure that you don't spam the chat or send any unnecessary messages. We want to make sure that if the chat is also being used for questions about the guest speaker's journey into medicine, that we are making sure that we respect that. All right, so I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And then Gopika, you are more than welcome to go ahead and get started.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Just to confirm, do you see my screen in full screen? Okay, perfect. I am so excited to be here. Thank you for joining. And you seem like a very exciting group just from like the initial chat and stuff like that. So today, I hope I can tell you a little bit about the MD PhD career and what it means. A physician scientist, it's actually a career that I didn't really know much about growing up. And it's not to convince all of you to go into it, but hopefully to inspire some of you who think this might be the right path to explore it and consider it as well. I am Gopika. I am a fifth year MD PhD student at the Medical College of Wisconsin here in Milwaukee. And if anyone wants to reach out or contact, here is my contact information. And I maintain an academic Twitter, so please talk to me through there as well. So before I get started, I get a lot of questions about, what is an MD PhD? So the primary role of an MD PhD trained person in general is to be a physician scientist. So we get an MD degree, just as all other medical professionals do in general. So we are trained to go see patients in any field that we choose to do. And I'll tell you a little bit about the training later. But then we also have a component of getting enough training to be a scientist where we are equipped to run a lab, get grants, study new things that we're interested in. So it's a balanced career of both being a physician as well as a scientist. And in general, we work in the same hospital as most other doctors, but you'll see a lot more MD PhDs in academic centers, which means these are programs oftentimes that you see where the medical school is associated with a big hospital and there's a bunch of research labs in the medical school. So usually it's those types of institutions that you'll see a lot more MD PhDs working in. I'll talk a little bit more at the end about the different career options available to you. You absolutely do not have to work in an academic center, but that's kind of where most of us aspire to go. And in our day-to-day life, it's a pretty good split between clinic days and lab days. So some people have clinic days once a week, other people have clinic days twice a week, others have 3 days a week, and then the rest of the time is protected for research or administrative work. So it definitely has a lot more flexibility in how you design your career, and a lot of it is kind of up to you in how you want to design it at the end of your career. So to give you a little bit more background about me, and I know a good chunk of you are international students as well, so we can talk a little bit about what that's like to go through this program. I was born in India, and I moved to the US actually closer to middle school and moved to Delaware. And we moved here right in the middle of the recession. So we ended up having to switch jobs and homes almost every year since then. So from Delaware, I ended up in Massachusetts for a little while. And then for my last year of high school, I ended up in Wisconsin. And after being in Wisconsin, our state actually does something really cool where I don't know how relevant the policy is still, but back then I was still eligible for in-state tuition. And it was great to attend at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, where I studied my bachelor's of science in biomedical engineering. At that time, I didn't know I wanted to go into medicine yet. I thought I wanted to do something related, something creative, something problem solving, and potentially something related to the health field in general. But I wasn't set on medicine yet. But after ending up there, I had some great experiences that we'll talk about that really convinced me to go into the MD PhD training. And I'm now here at the Medical College of Wisconsin. So I guess the one other point I really wanted to mention is throughout this time, you are not eligible to be on your parents' visa after 21 years of age. So I am still an international student studying here on a visa. And there comes a decent amount of challenges and considerations, especially when you want to pursue medicine on that. So please definitely ask questions if you have questions about that or any special considerations in general. And I'm happy to share more. So when you think about a journey through medicine, you'll often see a lot of these complicated maps of how many different steps there are. And to an element, there is some truth to it, but I hope I can actually break down to you a little bit of this training today with the hope that that we can actually provide you with a better roadmap for anyone that's interested. And I'll specifically emphasize the MD PhD part, but in general, it's the same training if you're interested in the MD components that I'm mentioning today as well. I see a hand raised and it went away.
Yes, so I want to question the difference between you and the physical health doctors is that you work like physicists,
Is that
right?
what?
You work beside as you doctor, you work as physicists.
So not exactly a physicist. You can do your PhD in physics and be a physicist, but I work as a doctor, and then the rest of it, I also work as a scientist. My specialty is in cardiovascular physiology, so that's kind of where I focus my research on. But you're welcome to do the research part of your science in any field of medicine or otherwise that you're interested in.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So in general, the track to actually being a practicing physician and a scientist is similar to what it is here for those interested in medical school, where after high school, you'll go through 3 to 4 years of undergrad, and then you do 4 years of medical school. And this is the time where we tend to extend it to 7 to 8 years to add that PhD component in. And then after that, we go through the very same residency and fellowship programs, but there are some special programs that we are eligible for as well, for residency and fellowship that we'll talk about. But in general, residency and fellowship can range anywhere from 3 to 7 years and 1 to 2 years after. And after that, you are eligible to kind of be an independent practicing physician and a scientist. And then if you're an international medical graduate where you attend the medical school outside, you kind of start at the point before residency. So you kind of skip over the first two components and start after. But of course, there are options to get a PhD during residency, but I'll talk about the monetary components of MD PhD that you won't exactly be eligible for during that time. So in high school, or after high school, when you go through your 3 to 4 years of undergrad, in general, I think some of the key questions we always get is about studying pre-med. In general, you can pick any major you feel like. You could be a political science major. You could do, like for me, I was a biomedical engineering major. You could be a music major, as long as you add about those 7 classes that are called the pre-med tract. So in general, you want to, as you pick your major and things like that for undergrad, you want to go through the pre-med tract. And then the other important key milestones that happen during undergrad is actually studying and taking the MCAT, which is the entrance exam to medical school. And then if you take a gap year, you have time to apply. So you apply at the end of your last year of medical school, undergrad. I did not take a gap year. So from a planning standpoint, at the end of my 3rd year of undergrad, I basically had to have my MCAT done and everything done and ready to apply. So those are just some timeline logistics if you are interested in going down this path and determining whether or not you can take a gap year. And this is where being an international student also matters, because as an international student, taking a gap year has some unique restrictions. Like for me, I had to take a gap year. If I was working, it had to be in the biomedical engineering field. But I personally wanted to do research in a very non-biomedical engineering area for my medical school. So those were definitely some decisions that played into whether or not I decided to take a gap year. Sarah.
All right, thank you for explaining this so thoroughly. I have a question. So my pre-med major is bioinformatics, but I heard that you have to take the MCAT the 2nd year because bioinformatics is 3 years. It takes 3 years to finish. So you have to take the MCAT during the 2nd year. Is that true?
Are you studying bioinformatics in the US?
No, I am an international student.
Yeah, so I think if you wanted to apply to medical school right away, then you would have to take it anytime between a year before your last year, so that last year actually goes towards your application cycle.
So that means I have to take it during my 2nd year?
Yes, unless you want to take some gap years after you're done with bioinformatics to study and take it.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah. And the one other advice I would give there, the other component of being an international student, it makes a big difference whether you study your undergraduate education in the US versus outside. So if there's programs you're interested in, or even an MD PhD program for that regard, please reach out to the admissions office and confirm their policy on taking students who've completed their undergraduate requirements outside. And they'll also, for the schools that do accept students who studied undergrad outside of the US, they have specific requirements of how your transcript translates over, how your GPA translates over. And you might also need to take some additional exams on English language skills and things like that. So I would definitely recommend that you reach out to the admissions office of programs you're interested in to look at some of those requirements.
Okay, thank you for the advice. I'm actually studying at an American STEM university, although that's outside of the US, still accredited. So
perfect.
Yeah,
Yes, that definitely makes a difference as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. And then after undergrad, during medical school, so what I'm showing you here is just in general for medical students, it's about 4 years. And I want to highlight that you're not specializing in anything here. So at the end of your MD, you're still very much a broad person in training. So you're a doctor, but you're not a surgeon, you're not a radiation oncologist, you're just a doctor, after which you go to residency before you can actually specialize in something. And during your medical school, you'll have about 1 to 2 years of what we call preclinical classes, where they actually teach you the various aspects of medicine. And a lot of those is discussion based and lecture based and things like that. And then you take your step 1 board exam. And then we take about 3 board exams to get our licensing. 2 of those are during your medical school. Then you have about 2.5 years of clinical rotation. So you spend that time in the hospital rotating through different specialties and learning about all of them. And then you take your step 2 board exam, apply for your residency. And then we have a match process in the US where you basically rank all your residency programs that you interview. And then the computer algorithm and the programs also rank which students they want. And the computer algorithm kind of already randomly matches you. The main difference that happens for MD PhD students here is that between the 1 to 2 years of preclinical years and step 1 board exam, and then the next 2 years of clinical rotations right in the middle, we usually take about 3 to 5 years, depending on the type of your PhD, what mentor you pick, how much time you want to spend in science and in the lab. You take that time off to do your PhD. So the rest of your training stays the same. You just kind of put in some time for dedicated research. Rodina.
Hi, good morning. So I study psychology, so can you please link between psychology and bioinformatics?
Can you what?
Can I link between psychology and bioinformatics?
I don't know about linking psychology and bioinformatics per se. If you mean studying bioinformatics for your PhD, you can absolutely study whatever you want for your PhD. But I don't know if I understand what you mean by linking those.
Oh, thanks.
Okay, awesome. Then one of the main things I wanted to emphasize is why bother taking the time to that PhD in the middle. And the main reasons you do a PhD, as a medical student, you can still do research. You're welcome to work with doctors during your medical school, physicians, scientists, and do a component of research. But as a PhD, you get protected time to really dive deep. And there's a lot of potential for more long-term impact in the medical and scientific field in general after you're done, right? So as a PhD, you have dedicated time, not only during your career, but also after, where you can study diseases that you care about. If there's things that don't exist for a patient, you can actually think about, well, how can I actively do some research to either create this new therapeutic strategy or where I can create this new preventative strategy that doesn't exist just yet. And medicine here is also very evidence-based, which means that a lot of times there's algorithms on how we treat patients, right? It says, well, if a patient is this way and this way, we ideally want to give this drug based on the research we've done. So medicine can be a little more regimented, where I think part of what I loved about engineering too is more of the creative work and kind of thinking outside the box and being able to be creative. And that's something you get when you are able to do your PhD. And that kind of goes hand in hand about wanting to think deeply about scientific problems. In medical school, you'll learn about the scientific problems, but in a PhD, you can actually address them or study them in depth. For example, a component of my PhD is actually looking at how estrogen influences cardiovascular disease from the standpoint of how women taking long-term oral contraceptives or menopausal women taking hormone therapy or those undergoing gender-affirming therapy all have various influences on cardiovascular diseases, and there's a subset of them that are at higher risk for cardiovascular disease. And for that, as a clinician, you would manage that, right? And say, okay, when they develop cardiovascular disease, let me help them. But as a scientist, I can say, well, that's a problem. I don't want them to get heart disease from estrogen, and actually go after studying that. So that's one of the main reasons for doing the PhD. And then the part that not enough people talk about actually is the flexibility in your workday. I see a lot of questions. So if you don't mind, why don't you put your questions in the chat? And if I feel like it's a good stopping point to answer them, I'll stop and answer them now. If not, we can wait at the end if that's okay. Thank you, guys. So in general, the flexibility in your schedule is also a very important consideration for those who want to think about work-life balance as well, where as an MD, you have scheduled times that you have to go in and things you're doing. But as a PhD, you're kind of your own entrepreneur. You're running your own lab. You're kind of doing your own thing. So there's some flexibility. And finally, a lot of times PhDs dedicate more time towards going to conferences and meetings. And these are an excellent time to actually meet others in your field, to network with people, to get to know others who are doing similar research. And a lot of that is very important in general for building community. And if you're a person that loves collaborating with people, learning about science, and talking to others who are doing some good work, then it's definitely a very exciting part of your PhD. I want to emphasize that you can go to conferences as a doctor as without a PhD as well, but it's the type of conferences, what type of research is being presented there, that will vary. These are some things that not enough people talk about before considering a career. And one of the main ones is, how do you afford the additional 3 to 4 years of being in school, right? One of the primary benefits of being an MD PhD student is that there's about 42 programs in the country. That number might have gone up by now, that are medical scientist training programs. So they're NIH funded. Those are fully covered. So your tuition is covered and you receive a living stipend for all the entire duration of your time there. The non-NIH programs that are still MD PhD will have some level of that support. Many will still give you the full tuition and stipend. Others will give you some variation of that. So that is something you'd have to look up on their website before you apply if they're not MSTP. But in general, financially, it's not a burden to do the extra studying. And our class sizes are actually smaller too, unlike medical schools where there's about 70 to 250 medical students, depending on the school you go to. Our class sizes are just 3 to 25, depending on the program. So it's more tight knit. You have your own program directors, you have your own administrative assistants to kind of help you through different programs. So it's definitely a lot more of a tight knit world in general. And then lastly, the salaries are actually pretty similar to your MD colleagues, depending on the time you buy out and what type of research you're doing, what institution, that can vary. But in general, you're not taking too big of a pay cut to do science, especially if you can negotiate that. And then that can also vary, either go higher or lower based on the administrative load you take, as well as leadership strategies in general. So all of that was about your training just to get through the MD PhD part and to actually be qualified to have a physician job. And then the last part of your training is residency. This is where you specialize and say, you know what, I want to be a cancer doctor. I want to be a pediatrician, or I want to be a surgeon. And all of that happens after you apply to residency. And I listed a couple of the big residencies here. And then there are certain residencies there are certain residencies that are more direct, where you specialize right away. So here, in the ones I showed you before, you kind of have to do a general internal medicine pediatric residency and then go on to specialize, versus these residencies you could just go into directly, and there's still advanced fellowships within these fields that you can do. And that is something to keep in mind. But in general, MD PhDs end up going to the same exact residencies that medical students do, but there are subsets of programs, for example, anesthesiology, or within internal medicine, many of these fields have something called physician scientist training program. So what that does is, in that duration, or with an additional year or two, they dedicate some time towards your residency to do a little more research so that you can apply for grant funding, or get your research to a point where you can eventually transition into being an independent physician scientist. So there are slight variations in what you're eligible to apply to after, in order to continue doing and maintaining that big research career in life in general. And then after that entirety of your training, and in general, I know medical school or MD PhD in general are both relatively longer, but after your medical school, a lot of it is you're actually out there practicing, right? So it doesn't feel as long, at least what they say. But after that, you actually have a wide breadth of career opportunities that are open to you. So you could, academia is what I mentioned, where people work in hospitals that are associated with medical institutions or medical education institutions, where they can do academic science. But if not, you can also go into industry and do a lot of good work there. If you're interested in policy or public health, a lot of MD PhDs also go on to do those roles. You can also transition into leadership roles in general. That is something a decent amount of MD PhDs are interested in. And then the last part, you're still eligible to go into private practice, which is what you traditionally think of. Yeah. The private practice is what you traditionally think of more of your MD students going into, because you buy into it and it is a you don't often have students there and things like that. So there's not as much teaching roles in general. But private practice is definitely still an option after MD PhD training if you're interested in from a career standpoint. So I gave you a whole bunch of information about the training, about what the career exactly entails, the money. And I want to give you a few pearls about who should do MD PhD versus who should not do MD PhD. In general, if you cannot imagine a career without research in it, then it's definitely a field for you, right? The PhD is definitely difficult and there's a lot of years in it. So being in the MD PhD program with clear intentions about wanting to do research and the type of research you want to do definitely helps you get through it. So as long as research is a true passion of yours, please consider MD PhD. And that's the kind of my second point, right? If you can envision a career where you're integrating research with clinical care and have a clear plan for it, especially at the end of your undergrad years, then it's definitely something that you want to do. And then the last part, for the rest of the talk, I'll actually talk a little bit about becoming competitive for the program, is actually having enough experience to understand if you can successfully do a PhD. That means during your undergrad, you should explore what being a researcher means, and you should try and talk to other physician scientists and see what their day-to-day life is like, and if you can be that, right? And once you have all of those information, if you want to do it, absolutely do MD PhD, and I highly encourage all of you to do it. And then I always get the question about, well, who shouldn't do the MD PhD? One of the pitfalls that students fall into is trying to do an MD PhD for the financial incentive, where because your medical school is paid for, they think it's a little better. But at the end, when you think about how much longer we put away making the medical salary or the attending salary, it kind of evens out. So you are putting away when you actually make your salary as a physician. So I would not consider the financial incentive as one of the main reasons to go into it. It helps for those of us who want to go into it to not have debt for so long, but that really shouldn't be one of your main reasons. And then if you're only interested in clinical research where you want to study patient outcomes, you're not really interested in doing more mechanistic or deep work into questions, you don't necessarily need a PhD. As a medical doctor, you're just as qualified to do certain types of research. And honestly, a lot of medical doctors end up doing basic science research without PhDs as well. So definitely think about what skills do you want to learn from your PhD before you consider that. And then lastly, before I tell you about what you should be doing now if you wanted to be competitive, I want to give you an honest perspective of the negatives of it as well, because everyone talks about the positives of what an MD PhD life is like and what a physician scientist career is like. There are some key challenges just with any career. There's downsides as well. Anyone that's going into academia, just with most corporate institutions and everywhere else in the country, there are some bureaucracies involved, right? So you do have to be wary of knowing that you can't just it's not like you're running your own company with no other rules. There's rules and regulations that others place that can limit how you do your research, when you do your research, how much money you're getting for your research and things like that, that it is something you have to navigate. And a lot of times there is competition in general for authorship and things like that with your colleagues. And that's something that's it's a competitive environment. So the competition in general does exist. So that is something that we worry about as well. And then as an international student specifically, on a visa, you do have limited grants that you're eligible for. So when you get to an independent physician scientist career, the primary way you're paid for the research part is actually through things like NIH grants, that's the National Institute of Health, or through private foundation grants, right? And so as an international student, you do have to be wary about getting enough mentorship throughout your training so that for the few grants that are available for you, you are eligible for and you get them. And then this is something that if you're a person that thrives on constant change, you'll be fine. But if you're not, you do have to consider that, every 2 years almost and few years you're changing. So you go to medical school, and then right when you're getting good at it, you go into your PhD. And right when you're getting good at it, you go back to the clinical part of medical school. And then you go to residency, and then you take some research years then, and then go back to clinics. So there's a lot of transitions in general in medical in the MD PhD program, which can be a pro or a con depending on how you look at it. But as a proponent of positive mental health, it's definitely something to think about and be ready for as you're considering it. And then the timeline is definitely an important consideration as well, especially if you're considering family planning or other aspects of your life that you have commitments to. Adding another 3 to 4 years in your 20s is not always an easy thing to do. But that being said, the MD PhD program in general does give you a little more flexibility in your schedule. So I think there's actually benefits potentially in being able to balance that better. So I think a big component of all of this is just being aware of potential challenges. And as you consider the career, think about it, ask your mentors, and figure out if this is right for you and how you can handle each of these challenges. And that brings me to my last point, which is where the mentor that you pick for your PhD can really make or break your experience, right? And that's where it's incredibly important at your stage and after you get to your medical school or MD PhD to pick the right mentors for you who are truly rooting for you. Okay. So for the last part, I want to talk to you about how to be competitive for an MD PhD program, if that's something you're interested in applying into. And on the left here in the lighter purple is actually what you need to be competitive for the MD part of your training, right? So you need a good MCAT score and your GPA. So this really is your academic pursuits. And then you need good letter of recommendations. And this is something, again, where you have to look up programs you're interested in, because there's certain rules for your letter of recommendation, as in you need one from your science professor, you need one from this particular field. So make sure you adhere to those. You definitely need clinical experiences. So whether that's shadowing, volunteering, scribing at a hospital, or in other ways, these clinical experiences are incredibly important for you to first off know that you want to do medicine, but to also tell medical schools after you understand that for yourself why you want to go into medicine. And then the last two here are meaningful extracurricular activities. So what sets you apart? What are you passionate about? What are your involvements? All of those kind of play into how medical schools look at you as what you are going to do when you get to their institution. On top of these, the last two things that a PhD, the MD PhD candidate needs to consider is the commitment to a physician scientist career. So I told you about not only the length of training, but also kind of balancing that research and clinics consistently throughout your life. Is that something you're committed to doing? Is that something you really want to do? And that's definitely something you want to think about and also be able to convey in your application. And similarly, you actually want to show that you are capable of doing quality, productive research, right? So do you have research experiences? Have you published or presented your research and actually proven that you're capable of doing a PhD? So those are some important considerations as well in this training program. So with respect to hi, I see questions. Please put it in the chat and then I'll pause to answer it now if it's pertinent to what I'm talking about. If not, we can take it at the end just so we're not interrupting. Perfect. And then I wanted to highlight a little bit about how I put my application together, but I just want to emphasize, by no means do you have to make your application look like this, right? It is your unique journey. It is how it is your unique journey and you decide how you want to go about doing this. But here's what I did during my undergraduate years, especially to show these last two components, which are specific to MD PhDs. So for the commitment to physician scientist careers, I actually started out in a program at my institution called the Undergraduate Research Scholars Program. That is something that I wasn't fully aware existed until I got there. But when I found it, I was like, you know what, let me explore it. So definitely don't be afraid to just take opportunities and try it. I thought I wanted to be a product design engineer and I thought, let me just try research. And that's how I stumbled upon it. So if there's experiences that you think are cool, definitely try it. And I enjoyed my experience in that research lab so much. I actually spent my summer after that exploring. I was back home with my parents, and then I was exploring research in the local regions in both the engineering world, as well as in a more what you call like cell culture, and what you think of like with the lab scientists and the beakers and stuff. So the more traditional definition of what you think of as bio research in general. And part of that important decision is actually taking the time to explore. And I think that's one of the most important components to emphasize here is if there's different aspects of careers you're interested in, explore them during your undergraduate training, because after that, your training is an incredibly long time. So make an informed decision when you apply into in general. So for me, having those variety of experiences was good to help me decide if I wanted to do this later. And then I went on back to Madison during my second year, and I actually couldn't pick between engineering and basic science. So I continued to do both engineering research, and I was also involved in a lab that studied cancer and how radiation can cure cancer and how we can actually make radiation better at curing cancer, basically. And that was one of the most instrumental experiences in my life, because I was able to shadow a doctor who actually portrayed the life I wanted, right? So he was an MD PhD. He was able to do really well this whole balancing of life and or lab and clinical life. And then I think the most inspiring part was he was able to take a lot of the stuff that he was studying in lab and translate them into clinical trials, which is something I really want to do in my career. And I think as you consider what careers you want to go into, definitely reach out to people who are living that life and see if you can see yourself in their shoes. And I think that's not just, oh yeah, they're doing science, but how much time do they have to see kids? What time do they get home? When do they sleep? Do they have time for vacations? Picking your career actually influences so much of your personal life as well, that it's important that you talk to role models and people that can portray a life that you're actually interested in. So that was another key component in my decision as well. And then for the productive research, and this is the part that actually takes a little bit of planning. As you decide to join labs or get research experiences, of course, for your first couple, you're there to learn. So learn as much as you physically can. And then you need to kind of be a little proactive about saying, I'm really interested in an MD PhD. And as part of my application and in training to be a PhD student, I want some experiences giving presentations. I want to present my research. I want to learn how to write my research. And those questions are incredibly good, because then they hopefully your mentors will give you opportunities to either go to local or national conferences, be part of manuscripts that they're writing, because that's how we disseminate science, right? We put it into papers that are peer reviewed, which means other scientists review it, and you publish it. And that's kind of what they say, the currency in academia, right? You want to have good quality publications. And of course, there's the other aspects of putting out your work out there, like patents or companies, but this is the main traditional way that most people do it. So as part of my undergraduate career, I definitely had to have those conference presentations, those papers under my belt when I was applying to the MD PhD program, so they could not only know that I was committed to the program, that I had had enough experience talking to physician scientists and working with physician scientists to know that I can do that life, but then the last part is proving to them that I had the skills and the ability to actually be successful in their program. And that's this last part. And then the cherry on top is putting your story together. And I think this is where a lot of pre-med students really struggle, is they say, well, I did all these random different things. How do I put it all together? And it's about how you share your story. As I mentioned, didn't know I wanted to do medicine. I was there looking to be a product design engineer. So I told them that. And I said, you know what really drew me to engineering is the innovation, the creativity, the ability to make something exist that didn't. And that part I still love, which is why I really want to get a PhD. But then what was missing for me in engineering is that satisfaction of treating that one patient in front of you, or that experience of one-on-one interaction with the people you want to help. And really being able to put all of that together and say, this is why I need to do medicine. And then selling them on why I would actually be a beneficial candidate. Unlike most candidates, I could actually bring my engineering to solve problems in medicine. You don't have to wait to collaborate with someone. I would bring those skills in, right? And then together, putting together my story, I was able to tell them that not only do I have a unique background and skill set that I will bring to medicine, but here's why I wanted to do it. on a lot of it in hindsight is very true, where this is exactly how I've designed my medical school career here, right? For the past 5 years, I've been doing research using some of my engineering background to look at how machine learning influences medicine, but I've also been using my love for actually working with patients to volunteer at free clinics and actually mentor students and do that side of my life as well. Okay, so these will be pretty quick. In the last about couple minutes before questions, I'm going to give you some quick pearls if you really decide this is what you want to do with your life. So choosing your activities is probably the most important thing you can do. For your research, pick something that's meaningful. If you join a lab, you worked in them, be grateful. But if you're not getting the experiences that you want, do not be afraid to make changes. But that can't be, oh, in my first year, they didn't give me a paper, so I'm leaving. If you're doing your absolute hard work and they don't have room to put you on a paper, or they don't have the ability to give you your independent project, or there's something else missing there, or there's conflicts with your mentor, then leave. But be mindful of how you make your decisions. All of these people eventually will have to write your letters of recommendations for research, but pick your research experiences carefully. And then I always, for the rest of your activities, ask yourself what makes you excited. You don't have to just do the clinical stuff. Clinical stuff, of course, is important, but then the rest of it, you want to dance. For me, it was giving back to the community through education. And that's what Davina and Ahmad are doing. Do that, right? So I think it's about what your personal brand is and what impact you want to leave behind in this world. And you can work on that. And a medical school will be very excited to see that you have a unique perspective that you're bringing to them and will continue in their medical school. So be creative about what you want to do. And then I can't emphasize the importance of building a mentor network and maintaining them, right? So you need your research mentor for sure, not only because they're going to teach you how to do research, but also you need a very strong letter from them in order to get into an MD PhD program. But you also want a strong clinical mentor who'll tell you the truth about what their life is like. And that's what I meant about having mentors in your life that you trust to tell you exactly what their life is like, what your shortcomings are, what your strengths are, so they can groom you to be a good applicant, a good doctor, and a good MD PhD. You also want a mentor that's going to make you a good writer and presenter. That's an important part of your career. You'll be doing it all the time. Outside of my life here, I present my research all the time. And that's just a part of what you do. So you want mentors who can help you with that. And then the last part, I actually have a mentor that I routinely talk to about balancing my life outside, because a physician scientist career can be pretty daunting and it can be pretty time consuming, but you want someone that shares some of your additional interests, whether that's mentorship or whether that's activities that you love and enjoy, that can really kind of navigate that aspect of your life. So it's not all of these don't need to come from one person. It's about having people that you respect and trust that can help you with all of these. And then I'm going to put in a plug for F1 Doctors here. I used to be the co-executive director for it. And this year we've passed it on to two amazing individuals who've taken the organization to a next level. But this platform allows you to connect with other students in the US who are medical students and residents, and they are international students. So it's a completely free mentorship opportunity for international students to connect and learn from other international students. So that is one excellent avenue if you're looking for initial mentors to get started with. And then I put down the stuff about recommendation letters on the right. I think we send out our slides later. So I'll let you guys read about the details of the recommendation letter. I just wanted that to be a resource. But I do want to emphasize certain things about selecting schools, especially as an international student. We have limited eligibility to which medical schools you can actually apply to. So most definitely do your homework. And one of those is the MSAR database on AAMC. So if you just Google MSAR and then AAMC, you'll find the link to that, where initially you can actually find, how many programs take international students and so forth. But I've actually been doing a little bit of research that shows that there's a lot of discrepancies between what's on there and what a school's policy actually is. So at this time, you still do need to reach out to every medical school you're thinking of applying to and make sure that they take international students. And for MD PhD programs, that's actually even more limited because their policies can change year to year based on how much money they have to actually fund you. So you do have to do a little bit extra homework before you select which schools you want to go into. Okay. And then here's another link that when they send out, I highly encourage you to explore this. So these are a whole bunch of research opportunities that I've found so far, at least for those in either the undergraduate years or the high school years, to participate in research in the US. And then there's a full list, this bottom link, that the AMC puts together of all the different summer opportunities that are available for international, not international, for all students. So when you go through those lists, definitely look into program eligibility. But I hope this serves as a good, at least starting point, if you're interested in research, to say, well, how can I get involved if your institution doesn't have it? And then this is the last part that I'll leave you with as you are going through that research experience, is start writing down, what are you studying? What is your intellectual contribution, right? What question exactly are you studying? How are you answering it? What challenges are you going through? How are you getting over them? And then write down how you're doing all of these, because the main thing that differentiates an MD PhD application is you have to add a 10,000 word essay that talks about your research experiences. And it helps as you're going through it to write down all of these things. So as you're compiling it, you can really tell them how you've grown as a scientist. And by the end of that essay, they should be convinced that you know both the positives and the benefits of research, and you're going to excel in their PhD program. And I put down a good example for that down here as well. So with that, I know the last part I went through quickly, but I wanted to make sure we accommodate for students who might not want to go into this career, so you don't have to look through all of it. But these slides will hopefully get sent out to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So before we get into any questions for Gopika, something that we like to do for our guest speakers, because we're not actually all in a room together, is we like to give them a virtual round of applause. So for our participants, if you wouldn't mind going into your reactions on Zoom and then adding a little clap or a little applause for her, we would really appreciate it if you did that. It's just our little way of saying thank you. And then our participants will also be filling out like a thank you form and sending you some messages later, which we'll share with you.
Oh, that's very sweet. Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. So also a quick reminder before we get into the questions, please make sure that you join Zoom with your full first and last name that you want to appear on your certificate, to make sure that we actually get you down for attendance. I see that some people have joined with just their first name, or they have something that says ... And so we really can't find you if you don't do that. But, and also before we get into the questions, we have our attendance poll for today. So please feel free to fill that out now. It's just, what is our guest speaker's name and what is her profession? So what is she doing? So please feel free to answer all those questions now, and then we'll keep the poll running while she's answering questions, so you can take a couple minutes to answer that if you need to. But we will be calling on you if you have a question, then feel free to answer.
Awesome.
All right, so Bara, I think you're up first.
Hey, is PhD MD a well-rounded program, or you can be both a great scientist and a great doctor?
I like to think you can be both a great scientist and a doctor, right? But the truth is, I think if you're going into this program, you have to accept that you will never be the best doctor to the extent that someone that's only being a doctor the entire time in their life 24/7 will be. And the opposite is true for a PhD as well. But that doesn't mean you're not good, right? You can still be excellent and you can still be amazing. And I think the main difference is, if you're interested in only being the most excellent doctor or more excellent scientist, you should just pursue those degrees. If you're interested in dedicating your life to merging those, so you want to bring all the amazing science that we do to patients, look at what the patient is going on and bring it back to the lab, that's where we really come in. And no one else is better at that than us, right? So that's like the main skill that we excel at and are the best at.
Does your knowledge of... I have another question. Can I ask it?
Yeah.
Does your knowledge of medicine help you with your research?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I look at research definitely a lot more from a clinical side and from how it helps different patient populations, maybe a little bit more than a traditional PhD might look at it. So it definitely helps a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. So next up we have Maritz.
Okay, hello. It's my turn now. After 4 months, I will join biotechnology major. And I asked for university about medical schools. They tell me after you taking 4 years for biotechnology, you can use it as a preparation for medical school. So this is correct, right? I do that. I take biotechnology for 4 years. So I will go to medical school, or I can cut this period and I go after 2 years.
So, if my understanding of your question is correct, you've been studying biotechnology and people told you you cannot go to medical school with that degree, but you're wondering if you can. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So, it depends on the country. So, in the US, you can study absolutely anything you want for your undergraduate degree. And as long as you have a good MCAT score and you take all the pre-med required courses, so there's like a certain number of English courses or biology courses that you need to take, then you're eligible to go to medical school. And if you have not taken those courses, there are post-bac programs where it's like about a year. If you don't want to do a full master's to take those courses, you could do one of those post-bachelorette programs to take one of those courses. But then here, at least in the US medical schools, it's actually highly encouraged to try different majors before you go in. But that's not uniform for other countries.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So biotechnology can help me to go medical school about the courses there.
It can help you to go to medical school here as long as they accept students that have studied their undergrad degrees outside of the US. So you do need to confirm that the medical school here will accept students with undergraduate programs outside the US. And then if they do that, then absolutely your degree can be helpful.
Okay. When I can want to do research paper about biotechnology, this is require many information about clinical and medicine.
Can you repeat that one more time? I'm sorry.
Okay, when I want to do research paper in biotechnology about genetic engineering or some like this, it require some courses and information about clinical and medical school, medicine overall.
Okay, so if you want to do research, then do you need information about both? You don't need official coursework to do research. What you need is to be with a mentor who's doing research, because until you are in science, you need basically a senior author that can guide you through doing research properly until you are qualified enough to do your own research. So it's not just about coursework. You do need those knowledge, right? You do need to know what you're studying. But then what you really need is finding someone that's doing good research that you can work with and learn from. So it's more of an on-the-job thing.
All right,
Thank
perfect. So moving on to Mena.
Okay, you said a lot of things about my reason and how can I be prepared for medical school, but can you clarify if I do research, where can I show them in my reason? Or where can I show that I do researches or present some scientific topics for people or help them in this field?
Okay, so when you do research, there's a few different ways that you get credit for what you've done, right? One of them is presenting at conferences. So you can officially list that in your CV or your resume as actually going and presenting your research somewhere. You can also publish your papers. That's something you do in collaboration with your actual research mentor. So when you publish them, that's available online, and that's one way of disseminating it out there. And then for medical schools, when you apply, you actually show them where and how you've done research. You actually have to write about your research experiences. There's like activities sections where you put down, I did this type of research with this person, this is what I learned, and this is what I published, or this is what I presented, and this is where I presented. So there's a space in your application to show them.
Thanks. Can I ask you one more question?
Yeah.
Okay, if I'm interested in some fields, they are not medical, this can make me rejected in some scholarships.
I think it depends on your interest. So if you're interested in being a plant biologist and that's your dream, then a medical school will probably not consider you as well, right? So why would they use a spot to take a doctor who's not interested in treating patients? But if you're saying, I am interested in studying this plant protein that's eventually going to be a therapeutic for someone in the medical world, then you're absolutely eligible. So I think it's about how far away your other interests are from medicine. It still needs to be medically relevant in order to actually go to medical school. And that's for you also, right? If you're interested in something way far from medicine, then you shouldn't waste time in medical school. So I think it's about how that interest ties to medical school from a career standpoint. Not that you can't do it as a hobby, but for a career at least.
All right, perfect. Is our next question from Ahmed?
I have one question.
Sorry, who's this?
Yes. The research opportunities available are really challenging. They need previous experience, good CV, and previous publication. So how can I get my first opportunity?
So a lot of times to get your actual research opportunity, you need to reach out to people that are currently doing research. It's a lot of cold emailing, honestly. If your school doesn't have an official research program, you have to reach out to these professors and say, I'm really interested in research. Can I work with you? So oftentimes it's just cold emailing a bunch of people until someone says yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So up next we have an opener. And apologies if I'm mispronouncing it.
Hi. So I'm studying computer science in Poland, but I just wanted to know that if there's no courses like biology or chemistry, but I take some online courses or I do research, I publish a paper, or I go to summer courses related to medicine, like what's the chance to get accepted to the medical school?
I'm going to go with, I'm not qualified to tell you that. So I'm not an admissions officer. So I can't tell you your chances of getting into medical school. So I'm going to preface with that.
Is it possible?
To get into medical school without doing an undergraduate degree?
No, without taking like biology or chemistry courses.
I don't think I fully comprehend your question. Do you want to speak closer to the mic? We also can't hear you too well.
Sure. Like I'm studying computer science, but in my university, there's no biology or chemistry courses to take because you mentioned that we have to take pre-med courses to get into med school. But if I do research, if I publish a paper or I participate in summer courses related to medical schools, like do you think will be possible to get into medical school?
Yes, I see what you're saying now. So as long as those are credit courses, so they actually show up on your transcript or part of your GPA somehow, either in your undergrad or as a post-bachelorate program officially, then you can, right? Because you're meeting your pre-medical requirements through those courses. So it's about taking courses, not just like, oh, I watched an entire chemistry course on YouTube. That will not count. But if you officially take something for credit and it shows up on your transcript, then it will count.
Okay, thank you so much.
Awesome. So we have about 2 more questions. And then for people that have remaining questions, would it be okay if we just gave them your contact so then they can just reach out to you if they have extra questions?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, perfect. So we'll go with Sammy and then we'll end with Ala. And then I'm so sorry to the rest of you that have questions. We definitely want to make sure they get answered. So you can email them to her after.
Hi. What is the MCAT and what is the importance of it?
The MCAT is the admissions exam that you have to take in order to go to medical school. So it's a nationally or I guess internationally administered exam that you go take, and it has questions about physics, chemistry, biochemistry, sociology, psychology. So all those different topics for pre-medical students. And it's a day-long exam that you take, and the score on that is something that it goes as part of your medical school application.
Okay, other question, please. What is the difference between your work and the pharmacist?
So a pharmacist is more involved with the medication components of it, right? So deciding there can be clinical pharmacists, so they are helping decide doses and things like that for patients on certain drugs. The doctors in general, I like to see as the ones that are coordinating the care plan. So if a patient comes in and they're having a certain problem, the doctors are the ones that says, well, what problem are they having? These are their symptoms, but what is their disease? And then how do we want to manage this disease? Do we want to treat them with medications? Do we want to treat them with surgery? Do we want to do something else for them? So those type of decisions a doctor makes. But if you decide you want to treat with medications, helping you determine what medication, what type of dose, what side effects you want to consider, things like that is what a pharmacist can help with. So there's a slight distinction.
Thanks.
Okay, so we'll go to Ala and then we'll wrap up today for questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so I study biology at the American University in Cairo, and I was wondering if the major on its own is enough for preparing for the MCAT. Also, is 1 year enough for preparing for it if I'm still beginning from the scratch?
That's a difficult question. It's about, so if you look up the topics in an MCAT, so if you just Google it, there's a whole bunch of topics that'll come up. If you think you've covered those in your coursework, then it's fine, right? But you also want to look up the admissions criteria at different institutions and see if you've taken all the classes that they need you to, then you're fine. There's also a lot of resources now for the MCAT. So if you're a self-studier, you can absolutely learn a decent amount from books and question banks and online videos and things like that. But if you feel like you don't, let's say you haven't taken organic chemistry at all, well, that's in the MCAT. So you should determine.
I take all the courses except sociology and psychology.
Depending on, again, your personal preference and how you study, if you think you can study those on your own, then you can absolutely still take the MCAT, right? Just make sure the requirements, if there is a particular sociology or psychology requirement class that you have taken something, because I took, if I recall back in my day, I had to take like an advanced psychology course for that reason. And then you can study the content on your own. So it's a personal choice. It's about how self-driven you are in studying and how much you think you can study on your own.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so that's all the time we have for questions today, but we will be sharing your PowerPoint with them if that's all right with you. And then they can feel free to reach out and then catch up on any of the information that they might have missed. All right, perfect.
That sounds great. Thank you for having me.
Of course, thank you so much for being here. Again, if people want to do a little round of applause as our way of saying thank you, that would be much appreciated. But we'll let you go now. And thank you so much for speaking to us today. It was wonderful to hear about all of your experiences in medicine and in science. We really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for having me. You guys are very sweet. Good luck. Definitely reach out.
Absolutely. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Okay. All right. So
Bye.
again, all right. So if you had questions, but we didn't have time to get to them, please don't worry. We'll be connecting you all with your email and we'll be sending you the slideshow. So please feel free to just ask your questions there and then read up on the PowerPoint if you happen to miss anything. So for right now, you still do have to be here. There's another poll that we're going to be doing for attendance at the end of the session. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll that we have now. So please make sure that you've submitted an answer before I close it. I'll give everyone like 10-ish seconds. I can see that 96% of the people in Zoom have responded to it. So I'm hoping that most of you were able to find it okay. But I'm going to give everyone 10 more seconds.
I'm so sorry. Where is the pool also?
The poll, if you go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, there should be something that says polls. You can see participants, where you can mute or stop your video. You might have to tilt your phone if you're joining Zoom on your phone, but you should be able to see it there. I can see that there's only 8 of you that haven't done it yet, so almost 100% of you have. So I'm going to go ahead and close it in another like 5-ish seconds. And then if you have any questions that are related to the program, then you can feel free to ask them at the end of the session. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and then we're going to move into our emergency medicine and CPR workshop. Again, you still do have to be here for both parts of our session today, as we will be taking attendance for both of them. And it's okay if you get the wrong answer on the poll, we'll still mark you down for attendance. If you're having issues submitting the poll, then please feel free to send me a message on Slack, preferably right now, so that I can get it sorted out for you and know that you at least tried to do it during the time that it was available. So if you want to message me on Slack or send us an email saying that you tried to get into the poll but you couldn't, then we'll still thank you for attendance.
How many
can't find
questions
the
were on
poll.
the
Sorry, if you have questions, do you mind raising your hand so I can see it? I'll answer like 2 or 3 questions before we dive into the workshop. Malak, do you have a question?
How many questions are on the poll?
It's just 1 question.
Yeah, I did.
Awesome. Marez?
How
Okay.
many the polls on one session?
Sorry, I think I was asking Marez for her question.
Yeah, I think I can fill it or not. I can't sure. So I find it now.
Okay, perfect. And if you can't find it, just message me and we'll get it sorted out. All right, so I am closing the poll now. Oh, I can see that all of you have filled it out. It says 100%. So I'm gonna go ahead and end it.
There are 2 polls or 1 poll?
There's just 1 poll.
Okay.
That was before minutes, right?
Yes, that was from about like 10-ish minutes or so ago. All
Okay,
right,
thank you.
Sorry, how many polls on one session?
we're gonna be doing 2 polls per session.
Please, I have submitted the previous poll. Shall I submit another poll, or it was the previous poll?
Yeah, you can just wait for the next one. All right.
Okay.
So I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen. I'm also
Where can I find the poll?
all right, we're gonna the poll is done now, so I'm just gonna move into the workshop. Again, please remain muted unless you are asking a question or answering a question. And then we'll get to questions that you have at the end of the workshop, okay? All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen. I'm also gonna send everybody a link of what I'm about to start talking about in the chat. So that way, if you want, you can go ahead and follow along. I know that for a good chunk of you, English isn't your first language, so it can sometimes feel like I'm speaking a little bit fast. If you ever feel like I'm speaking fast, please feel free to message me and let me know, hey, you're speaking a little bit fast. Could you slow down? And I would be more than happy to do that. But I'm going to go ahead and send all of you the chat and the link to my presentation for today. And then you can go ahead and find it there and follow along. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Please remember to stay muted unless you are asking or answering a question. All right. So we're really excited to start our workshop today. And again, thank you so much for being here with us. Welcome. We've already gone through the reminders, so we don't have to do that again. Again, if you haven't changed your name on Zoom, please do so now, so that way we can make sure we get you down for attendance. Okay, so I'm going to change the permissions in the chat so you can all respond with one another. But just feel free to answer how you're feeling today on a scale of this cat mood board that I found online. But yeah, feel free to send in how it is you're feeling on a scale of 1 through 9.
Number 2.
Okay, I'm hearing a 2. I'm seeing some 1s. That's okay. I completely understand. Some
1.
people need to sleep. 1, yeah. Okay, some 7s and some 5s. Okay.
Number 5.
It's 1.
1. Yep, I'm seeing a lot of 1s.
6.
I'm number 6.
Beautiful.
I'm number 5.
Number 5. Okay.
Number 1.
7.
Yeah,
Me is 4.
I'm seeing a lot of
Number
1s.
7.
Number 1.
I'm tired.
We all want number 8.
Number 2.
Number 8.
Awesome.
Number 6.
Number 4.
Number 7.
Number 1. Number 1.
I'm going to give everyone 10 more seconds to respond in the chat or anything. And this is just for fun. It's not for
Number
attendance.
7.
Number
4.
A lot of people are 1s and 7s.
Number 4. Number 7.
Number 9.
Number 7.
I'll be able to watch this again or not? Because this is not my first language, so
Yes, you can watch this again. Don't worry.
thank you.
No worries. All right. Okay, I'm seeing lots of different numbers actually. My favorite is 2, just because I like the way it's thinking. But I completely understand feeling like a 1. Okay, so welcome to our very first workshop. Again, I sent the link out in our Zoom chat, so please feel free to follow along. And again, we will be providing volunteer hours to those of you that are able to translate into Arabic or into Hindi. We are in need of translation services, so if you're able to do that, that would be amazing, and then you can send it to us and you'll get volunteer hours. If you're not able to, please don't worry. It's not a requirement. It's just if you're able to and if you'd like to.
Sorry, what is the last link you added?
So the last link that I sent out was for the Google slideshow that I'm presenting right now. And again, if you have any questions, please save them for the end of what I'm presenting. All right, so this is the first slide. So it's kind of a background on the levels of first aid certification that you can get. And it really depends on which country you're located in. So for me, in my country, I grew up in the US, so I got CPR certified in high school because they provided it as a course for us to take outside of school hours. And in undergrad, I got certified in CPRC, which is a more intense level of CPR. You learn how to do CPR on babies and on children, and you learn about some different medical emergencies. So people that work in different professions have to get CPR certified. If you work in a hospital, you might have to get CPR certified. If you are a teacher and you have to work with small children, you would probably have to get some level of CPR basic life services certification. So it really depends on your profession and if you would like to do it. So CPRA is really just offered to those who want to learn about the basics of CPR. Like, what do I do if an adult is choking? How do I use a defibrillator? And then how do I know how to treat any emergencies if I'm there and no one else is able to help? CPRB is for people that might work in childcare or are interested in doing CPR for babies only. All right, and then CPRC, which is the one that I am certified in, it covers all aspects of children and adults and babies, and it also includes 2 rescue skills. So we can do emergency first aid in CPRC. So this way we're able to provide urgent assistance to injured or ill adults, infants, and also children. All right. So throughout my presentation, I'll be asking you some questions, and if you would like to answer, please feel free to raise your hand on Zoom and I'll call on you. Or if you would prefer to message in the chat, I'll also be checking on that if you prefer that. Again, participation is not required, but it's just if you happen to know the answer and you would like to share, we'd be more than happy to have you participate. So does anybody know what the 3 C's are in CPR assistance? And I'm going to call on people. So Abdul Rahman.
CPR, A, and B and C.
I definitely understand thinking that, and those are 3 levels of CPR, but those aren't the 3 C's that I'm looking for. But good try.
Excuse me, I want to ask some question.
Sorry, we're going to do questions at the end.
Can you speak more slowly to understand what you say?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Mena?
How can I know that the attendant is taken?
Can I answer?
Yeah, you can go ahead and answer.
First, we check the responsiveness of the patient. Then we call the emergency 111. Then we compress the chest and do CPR about 30 turns compression, then to breast to the patient.
Perfect. Yeah, you got so many of it. So yeah, so the 3 C's are to check, call, and care. So the first check is we have to check the scene. What's going on? Are there any emergencies that prevent us from helping? Then we check the area. And then lastly, we check the patient. I know it might seem counterintuitive to check the patient last, but that's really how we make sure that we're assessing the situation properly and effectively. So the first part of arriving at emergency is just getting to the scene, getting to the actual place where an emergency is happening. So if you get to an area and you find that there's fire, or perhaps you can smell that there's gas, or a gas detector is, a smoke detector is going off. If you see broken glass somewhere, or if you see open wires, are you allowed to help? Yes or no? Is it safe for you to proceed? And you can raise your hand or answer it in the chat. I'll be looking at both.
What was the question again?
So the question was, is it safe to, go and help the patient if you notice that there are things like fire or gas or glass or wires? Ahmed?
I think it isn't safe. We should first check the safety of the patient and me. We should get out the patient from the danger area to a safe place so we can help him.
Sorry, I was asking Ahmed, but you are partially correct. We do want to make sure that we're making sure that the patient is safe, but if there's fire, gas, or glass, well, then we're not allowed to help, unfortunately. I know it definitely seems counterintuitive, because if there's a dangerous scene, you might think, okay, let me move this person to a safer place, but you're actually not allowed to help, or you shouldn't help if you see something like that. All right. So if you see a knife in your patient's chest, do not remove it. You call 911 or whatever the emergency number is in your area, and you try to stabilize the wound, ask the patient questions if they are conscious at all. And then if there's a baby on the scene, make sure you check the baby first, because they might be in more critical condition, before you check their parents or their guardians, or really whoever's there. All right, so we're going to go through two scenarios. One where we have a conscious patient and one where we have an unconscious patient. Okay, again, first we check and we make sure that the scene is safe. Are there any sharp objects, any gas? Okay, we've done that. We've assessed there's no natural disasters going on. There's nothing there that would make it dangerous for us as a civilian to help. And so you can introduce yourself to the patient if they are conscious and say, hi, my name is so-and-so. I'm a civilian. Or if you are trained in first aid, you can say, hi, I'm trained in first aid. And then you ask if you can help them. If you ask the patient if you can help them and they say no, are you allowed to help them? Or do you have to call 911?
I think I have to call 911.
I'll call on people that have raised their hands. So Mohammed, Imad?
Okay, sorry about this question, but how can we get the certificates in the end?
So I'm going to answer questions about the program at the end. Marez, did you want to answer?
Yeah, I will tell you about how I explained to him it's dangerous to stay until I call 111 and they can reach to the accident, so it will be in dangerous state than he was. So I will help him at this time.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. So although you can't actually help them if they say no, you can explain to them that it might be dangerous and then ask if you can call 911 for them. You can always call 911 to assess an emergency scene, even if someone is not wanting to be helped. So you can call 911 for them, but unfortunately we can't help them. So thank you. Okay, so the next steps. So what we're going to do next is, if you want to help someone, but they say no, you call 911, you wait for them to get there. But if you start to help someone, if you ask them and they say yes, please make sure you don't stop helping them until emergency medical services arrives, or if you see the person start to breathe, if they were not able to breathe before, or if you feel like your safety is in danger. So if you feel tired and you feel like you're not able to help them without putting your own safety in risk or in danger, then you can stop helping them. Or if the scene becomes unsafe, let's say there wasn't a fire when you got there, but then a fire started after you got there, that makes the scene unsafe, and so you have to head out. So when you arrive at the scene, who do you help first? You, children, or adults? You can raise your hand and I'll call on you. Mena, I think I saw your hand first.
I think I should help myself first, because if I can't help myself, I cannot help them.
Perfect. Yes, you want to help yourself first. Who do you help second? Someone else I'll call on. Karen?
Children.
Okay, yep, you would help children next. And then third on our list is adults. Okay, so we're gonna be talking about our scenario 1 first. So this is when your patient is conscious and they've agreed to let you help them. So we'd ask them these sample questions, and sample is an acronym. So does anybody know any part of the sample acronym? Like, what are some of the questions that we might be asking them? And I'm also seeing in the chat that people responded for the other question. Great job, everybody. Ala, do you know any of the sample question acronym letters? Okay, I'll move on to Mohammed.
I will ask him first what's his or her name, what happened to him.
Yeah, you would definitely want to ask them for their name too. That's a good one. Abdul Rahman, did you want to suggest anything else?
How this happened? How this happened to him over here?
Sorry.
How this happened for her or to him?
Yeah, what happened or what events just last took place? Yeah, that's definitely a great question to ask.
Can you provide some
Gardenia?
answers?
Gardenia? Sorry,
Yes.
Gardenia.
Asking about what are you feeling, like if you have a sugar.
Yeah, you can definitely
Provide
ask
some
them
answers.
Yeah, that's definitely a great question. I'm seeing in the chat that people are saying signs and symptoms, allergies, age, how do you feel, past medical histories. Perfect. I'm seeing lots of great ones. So I'm going to go ahead and share them all with you. So S is for signs and symptoms. A is for allergies. So they should hopefully know what their allergies are. And if they don't, maybe their parent is nearby who might know, because sometimes small children don't know what they're allergic to. Ask them for their medication. Are they on anything right now? Are they taking anything, or have they taken anything? Then you can also ask them for their last intake, their path.
Mic is off.
So our second, thank you. Thank you for letting me know, friends. Our second scenario is when we have an unconscious patient. So when we have an unconscious patient, we have to call 911. And are we able to ask an unconscious patient if we can help? Can they answer? Nader?
No, we can't ask them because they are not with us. They are like falling asleep. But we can check if they are breathing, and can check their blood pressure. There is blood like the blood. What is in English? Like we have in our watch the heartbeat to send to sense their heartbeat. Trying to wake them up by using like alcohol to make them breathe it, so their brain starts to work, that there is a certain action to take.
Yeah, absolutely. So if they're unconscious, they cannot respond to us, so we can move forward with implied consent. So what implied consent is it's called the Good Samaritan law, and it allows you to help somebody if they're unconscious and you were protected by the loss of aid. I don't believe that they can sue you if you help them. All right, so what you're going to do is you're going to walk up to the patient and make sure that they're lying flat on their back if they're on the ground. And you want to clap at both of their ears and then tap them on their shoulders and ask, are you okay? Are you okay? So does anybody know why we actually tap on their shoulders?
Maybe because it's the most place that will probably not harm them, because I basically don't know what injury they have. So for safeness, I think.
Yusera, did you want to add anything? Okay, Gardenia?
I was going to say the same thing.
Can you hear me?
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so if you were going to say the same thing, that's partially correct. Great effort. So basically what we're trying to do is when we are arriving to the scene and somebody is unconscious and we are clapping and tapping them on their shoulders, we're actually trying to stimulate muscle contractions.
I didn't hear.
No, strikes on internet.
Okay, yeah, I think there might be some internet problems. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Can you repeat it?
Yeah,
Can
we
you
can
repeat
do
it?
It's okay now.
Okay, perfect. I'm glad everyone can hear me. Okay, so I will repeat that, don't worry. So the reason that we actually tap people on their shoulders, and let me check the chat to see if anyone did it.
Can I answer?
I'm gonna move forward with the answer now, but you can participate in the next question that I ask if you'd like to. So the reason that we tap on their shoulders is to stimulate muscle contractions in their neck. We're trying to see if when we stimulate these muscle contractions, they actually wake up. So we're trying to get them to become conscious. So that's why we tap on their shoulders there. All right, so once you get there, you realize that they are unconscious, you clap at both of their ears, you tap their shoulders. If you see other people at the scene, you ask somebody to call 911 or whatever the emergency number is in your area, and then you ask another person to grab an AED, which is a defibrillator device. And then what you're gonna do is as they're lying on the ground, you wanna tilt their chin back, so like this. And then what you wanna do is you wanna place your ear to their mouth, and then you wanna listen for their breathing sounds, and you wanna look out at their chest like this. So this is my ear, this is the patient's mouth, and then this is their body. You wanna see if their chest is rising and falling, which means that they're breathing, and you wanna listen for breathing sounds. You should be able to hear it in their nose or in their mouth. And then this should only take about 5 seconds. If you hear that they are breathing, if you see that their chest is rising and falling, that they're breathing, then you're not gonna do CPR. But if they're not breathing, you can't see any movement in their chest, and if you check their pulse and you can't find one, then you can move forward with CPR. But if you see that they are breathing, what you want to do is you want to move them into something that we call the recovery position. So let's say I'm listening and I see that their chest is rising up and down. Good, they're breathing. What I want to do is I want to bend their knee and take their elbow and just roll them onto one side. It should look like the bottom left, the bottom right picture. Does anybody know why we put them in recovery position? And I'll check both the chat and you can raise your hand if you would like to participate. Anybody know why we put them in recovery?
Sorry, what was the question again?
Oh, so the question was, why do we put them in recovery position? I'm gonna go with Yasera.
To prevent the aspiration.
Okay, that was a good guess. Anybody else want to give it a shot?
Well, I was going to say to make them breathe in a better way or something.
These are all really good. These are all really good guesses. The actual reason, and I'm seeing someone say it in the chat too, is to keep their airway clear and open. That's exactly what it is. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to prevent them from choking if they happen to throw up. If they throw up and they're lying down on their back, they might end up choking on it. If you roll them into the recovery position and they throw up, it'll go out of them instead of potentially choking them. So that's why we put them in that position. It's to prevent any choking.
Okay, I think there is another reason because when we do that, the tongue doesn't fall into the throat and choke.
Exactly. Yeah, we're just trying to prevent choking. So good job, everybody. Okay, so again, check your ABCs one more time after you move them into that recovery position. Put your hand in front of their mouth, see if you can feel anything. And then some potential causes why they could be unconscious, but they're still breathing. It could be that they have diabetes and they forgot to take their insulin, dehydration, a weak stomach, or potentially that they had a seizure and are now unconscious. So this is our more intense scenario. This is what happens when we arrive to the scene and we find that a patient is unconscious and they are not breathing. So what we're going to do is we now proceed to perform CPR. So if you have gloves and an N99 barrier mask, which prevents you from getting sick or from getting any infections that they might have, use them. If you don't, that's okay. They're not completely required. So for adults, what you want to do is over their sternum, which is a bone that essentially is at the center of what's connecting your ribs, you want to do 5 centimeter depth compressions. So this is how you're going to do compressions. You make a little high five, and then you kind of clasp your hand around that. This is how you're going to do your compressions on your adults. So Yes, I'm seeing some people with their cameras on doing it too. Awesome. And so you're going to do 5 centimeter depth compressions, hands interlocked with one another, and you're going to do 30 compressions. And then after you do 30 compressions, you can, over their mouth and nose, deliver 2 rescue breaths, and then keep going until someone, until the ambulance gets there, if a defibrillator gets to you, etc. For children, it's pretty similar. It's still a 30-to-2 ratio, except we're not going as deep. We're only going about a third of the way into their chest depth. For babies, it's different. We do 2 finger compressions. It's still over their sternum, but babies are really small. And if we use our entire hand, we might cause some fatal damage. So we use 2 fingers over their sternum, and then you still do the compressions. And it's about 100 to 120 compressions per minute. And these are what your compressions and rescue breaths should look like. All right, so some other technology that you can use if someone is unconscious and not breathing is an ambu pump. So it's used when a patient isn't breathing, and it's also in combination with CPR to try to get them to start breathing again. We also have a defibrillator. A defibrillator is a device that delivers electrical shocks to the body. You place the pads where the pictures tell you to, all around the patient's chest, and that's kind of what they use to try and revive them. And then we also have an airway device. So an airway device is what we can use. You insert it upside down into the patient's throat or their airway, which keeps it open and helps them essentially make sure they're getting as much air into their body as possible. All right, and these are some other devices that you can use. There's a suction plus catheter. You use it to remove any excess liquid or vomit from an unconscious person's mouth. And there's also an oxygen tank. And then if you want to go ahead and try this right now, you're more than welcome to. You can grab a pillow or a doll if you have one, if you have younger siblings that might have one, and you can pretend that you've arrived to the scene of an emergency. Go through all of these steps. If you want to do this right now, you're more than welcome to. It's not a requirement, but it's just if you'd like to make this material a little bit more interactive and kind of do it on your own. But you can do all these things with your pretend pillow patient. Does anybody know if we're performing compressions on a pillow, why is it a lot easier than it would be if we were to perform compressions on an actual person? You can raise your hand or answer in the chat. And yes, do not practice on another human. Make sure it's a pillow or a doll. Thank you, Ahmad. Okay, so Sarah, you have your hand raised?
Is that because they have like the bone structure, the ribs?
Yeah,
so it's harder
exactly.
to
Yeah, absolutely. So you're definitely right. It's because a human has bones, obviously, and they have a rib cage. Your rib cage is protecting heart and lungs. So we want to make sure that when we're doing it on our pillow, we realize that's not going to actually be that easy if we had to perform compressions on a real person. But yes, great job, everybody. So now we'll go and talk about some other medical emergencies. So one is partial versus complete choking. I know, I'm pretty sure most, if not all of us, have experienced some kind of choking before, whether it's, water going down the wrong pipe, quote unquote, or if it's like a small piece of food, or we've seen somebody choke. So I think it's something more of us might be familiar with as opposed to someone being unconscious, but that's just speculation. So if someone is partially choking, then it means that their epiglottis is partially, but not completely plugged. So would we perform the Heimlich maneuver on somebody that is partially choking? You can raise your hand or answer in the chat. Abdul Rahman?
Yes, first I must to treat this choking. We must put hands first. If we can get this thing or food with our fingers, be sure that we wear gloves. Our fingers one time. So one time. So if it don't if we don't have.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
We get it more back. So we go up.
I'm so sorry, I can't hear you super well. Do you want to type your answer in the chat? Okay, I'll call on someone else in the meanwhile.
Okay.
Can I hear the question again?
Yeah, sure. So, do we perform the Heimlich maneuver if someone is partially choking? So the Heimlich maneuver, we'll talk about it in a second. You essentially wrap your arm and make a fist around the person and go up and down to try to dislodge the object. Yeah, Bara, go ahead.
Simply tell them not to panic in the first place,
Mhm.
then encourage them to cough, and if they still can't breathe completely, you do compression as the picture in the down left, down right represents. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So that is the right answer. So what we're trying to do is, and good job everybody else that had their hand raised or was answering in the chat. Yes, so if it's partially but not completely lodged, we want to make sure we are encouraging them to keep coughing, to try to get that object dislodged, but we don't perform any Heimlich maneuvers or abdominal thrusts until it becomes completely lodged. If an object is completely lodged, then you'll notice that the person is unable to breathe because their airway is entirely blocked. So that's when we perform those abdominal thrusts. And then you can see the picture in the bottom right, you bend the patient forward slightly, you put their leg in front of theirs, and then you can do 5 abdominal or chest thrusts. So you can wrap your fist around them with your thumb and then go up and in. So does anybody know why we need an abdominal and a chest thrust option? So abdominal is a little bit lower, chest is a little bit higher. Does anybody know? There are a couple of reasons, so there's multiple right answers. Yara?
It's just to increase the abdominal pressure. When you increase the abdominal pressure through your hands, it can just get the foreign body out.
Yeah, that's definitely a good guess. And we do want to make sure we're combining our abdominal thrust with back throws as well. So that's a good guess. Bara?
Maybe the position of the blockage, maybe it's in their airway, maybe it's in another place.
Yeah, that's another great guess. So essentially what we're trying to do is we want to make sure we have options for people, for women and other individuals that might be pregnant, or if somebody's in a wheelchair, you won't be able to do the chest thrust like that because they might be sitting down or you're not able to actually reach their abdomen. That's why we need multiple options. All right, yes, and then these are just some tips.
Can I ask a question?
You can ask your question at the end of the workshop. Okay.
What if the patient have an internal
Sorry, I can't hear you. Okay, so for our special cases, I mean, this is just if someone's in a wheelchair, if they're significantly taller or shorter than you, if there's a fire in your house, these are just some tips and you can read over them later. And this is what we do for choking in babies. So we place our finger around their chin and we try to keep their mouth open. You want to tilt the baby's face down and deliver 5 back blows with the bottom part of your palm. And then with your hand, on the baby's head, you flip them over, and then with 2 fingers, you do chest thrusts. Again, we're not doing anything like wrapping our fists around the baby or using our entire hand. We're just using the bottom part of our palm, flipping them over, and then 2 fingers. All right, so another medical emergency is a heart attack. So a heart attack is caused by a blockage of an artery that supplies the heart. This can potentially lead to a stroke. Some symptoms might include nausea, vomiting, or very severe chest pain. So what do I do if I see that someone might be experiencing a heart attack? I make sure I call 911, encourage them to take 2 acetylsalicylic acid tablets or aspirin or NyQuil. And then if it does lead to a stroke, you might see that their face, the left side of their face becomes kind of numb, their arm might become numb, their speech is slurred, and then the most important thing is to get there in time. Bleeding is also another medical emergency. We want to make sure that if you see someone's bleeding, you clean and compress the wound and put a bandage on top. And if the wound is too large, if you see that there's a lot of rapid bleeding, you look at the image, you can actually see that there's a tourniquet. So what you do is you want to essentially grab a band or something and tie it 5 to 10 centimeters above the wound. Does anybody know why we use a tourniquet for someone that might be bleeding excessively from a certain location? I'm going to go with Jana.
If there is someone is bleeding, you must first wear gloves to ensure that you couldn't infect with if he has infection or she.
Yeah, that's right. You want to make sure that they might not have an infection. So if you have gloves, that would definitely be helpful to wear them. Haneen? Okay, I'll move on to Merez. Okay, Bara?
Restricting blood flow to slow it down.
Sorry? Yeah, to slow it down. Yes, exactly. So we're trying to reduce the amount of blood flow to a specific area. So that way we can ensure that they don't bleed out, because that would not be good. Another kind of medical emergency, allergies. They often present as an inability to breathe, tightening of the throat, rashes, swollen lips, wheezing, or an increased heart rate. If an EpiPen is needed, you take off the blue side of the EpiPen and you inject the orange side into the upper outside of the leg. So this is someone's leg, this is the outside of their leg. Take off the blue part and you take the orange part and stick it into their leg. Then you rub the area for 5 seconds to increase circulation and make sure that the drugs are spreading. These are some other associated medical emergencies. Nosebleeds, make sure you're always tilting the head down, not up. Someone knocks out a tooth, put it in some milk or saliva until EMS arrives. If you get chemicals in your eyes, make sure you use an eye wash immediately. If you have a sprain or a bone infection, make sure you're using the Rice method, which is resting, increasing it or elevating it, compressing it using ice. And then we also have diabetic emergencies, which could present as confusion or aggression. So making sure that patients remember to take their insulin on time, and then pulmonary edemas. All right, so now we're going to go into some practice scenarios. I'm going to lower everybody's hand from the last time that I asked a question, just in case new people want to answer it or if it was left over from last time. So for these practice scenarios, feel free to just raise your hand, answer it. I'll also be checking the chat as well. Oh, I love what someone said, blue to the sky, orange to the thigh. Perfect. That's a great way of remembering it. Okay, so for our first practice scenario, if an adult that's 32 years old calls in complaining about chest pain, after you arrive to the scene, you can see that the patient is anxious and sweating. What are we going to do first? I'll ask Bara.
Simply tell them not to panic and ask them if they wanna me to help them.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
No, that's it for now.
Okay. Yeah, that's perfect. Those are definitely the first things that we want to do. Introduce them, inspect the scene.
Tell him not to panic because this chest pain maybe because it has panic.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to make sure that they're not panicking. Sammy?
Maybe he has diabetes shock.
Sure, yeah, we could ask them if they're taking insulin, if they have diabetes. That's another great question. Abdul,
Ask them if they have any disease.
Abdul Rahman, I think your hand's up.
What about the internal bleeding of patient?
That's a great thing to kind of be thinking about, but unfortunately, us as civilians, we wouldn't be able to see internal bleeding. It'd be nice if we had X-ray vision for, emergency cases, but unfortunately, we were not doing this. Yeah, ask them the sample questions, asking them where the pain hurts. Perfect. I'm seeing lots of great suggestions in the chat. Mohammed, anything else to add? Okay, I'll go to Basmala. Okay, I will finish up with Merez. Go ahead.
The first thing I will do is seeing the heart condition.
Is ask them if they have a heart condition. Yeah, that's another great question to ask, because if they're presenting with abdominal pain, that also might be an issue. Okay, I'll finish up with Mirez and then we'll go with the answer.
Okay, I make him to feel relaxed, because when he feel relaxed, he can stop his panic and anxious, and will be in constant state. So to help him, because this is important to be relaxed.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is really important to be relaxed. So yes, we would definitely want to ask for something like that. Okay, so I'll show you all the answer now. You ask the patient what happened and where it hurts. They tell you that they are feeling it all over their left side and that it hurts there. What do we think the patient is experiencing if it's on the left side of their body? What major organ do we have there? All right, I'll go over the answer. It is an MI, or a myocardial infarction. Does anybody know what the other more layman's term name for it is? Heart attack. Yeah, exactly. I'm seeing heart attack in the chat. Perfect. Perfect. All right. So our second practice scenario is a school nurse gets a call from a school for a child who's feeling really lightheaded and confused. The nurse asks the child if they've eaten or drank today, and they say they have. And the child continues to feel worse. They have dizziness or fatigue, and they go unconscious, and the nurse calls for an ambulance. They're still breathing, but they're not feeling too great, and their pulse is okay. So what kind of test do we think they should do? I'll go with Miko.
A blood test.
Yeah, sure. A blood test would be a great one to run. Mohammed El Said. Okay, I'll go to Ahmed Mustafa. Oh, I think it's the same audio issue. So sorry about that. Okay, I'm also gonna look at the chat. A blood pressure test, that's also a great one. You think someone thinks it might be an infection, allergies, heart attack. These are all really great and very educated guesses.
Maybe they have lack of vitamins.
Yeah, it could be a lack of something nutrient related, or they're not getting proper nutrition. So what we actually end up doing is we run
maybe diabetic.
So what we end up doing is we run a blood sugar test, and what we actually end up finding is that the child has diabetes and unfortunately forgot to take their insulin. So good job, everybody that was suggesting all of these sorts of different tests and what it could possibly be. It could really be a lot of different things. It's just diabetes and a lack of insulin for this specific case, but everything that all of you were saying is great. All right, so an ambulance is called for a baby who is choking. So what are the steps that go into helping the baby that we just covered?
The first is partially or complete choking.
Yes, okay, so I'm gonna call on Ahmed Hisham, who has their hand up.
انتوا جايبيني هنا تهزقوني ولا ايه؟
Sorry.
I'm gonna use my two fingers and pressure on his chest, but slowly, don't with more force, to don't hurt him.
Yeah,
We're
exactly.
to first roll him in the stomach and then push like 5 times with the bottom of our palms, and then use the 2-finger method with compression until the object is dislodged.
Exactly. So that's what we would do if we have any partial or complete choking. Great job, everybody, for addressing both of the scenarios that it could be. And yes, all of those are right. So if we get called to a house where an adult is having a partial seizure, why is it important to get there as soon as possible? I'm going to look at Kenzie, did you want to answer this one? I'll also look at the chat.
What partial season?
It's important to go there as soon as possible because it's related to the brain, and it's not about brain problems that it spreads quickly, and it's better be rescued as soon as possible.
Yeah, exactly, because the reason that we want to get there, aside from the potential that someone said in the chat that they could unfortunately pass away, is because a petit mal seizure, which is known as a partial or an incomplete seizure, could turn into a grand mal seizure. This is something that we didn't explicitly cover, but if it escalates into a full seizure, what we want to make sure we're doing is we want to make sure that there's nothing around the person. We want to make sure we're moving any nearby objects, especially sharp ones, away. You want to make sure you support their heads. If you have a pillow or a blanket, in the case of an emergency, you might have a backpack or a jacket, and you want to put it under their head and make sure you don't restrain any of their movements, and try to just give them as much space to have their seizure as possible. If you try to restrain them, that could actually cause more harm. We don't want to do that when people are having a seizure. We want to make sure that they're put in the recovery position after and that they have as much space to move as they need to, because it's not something they can consciously control, of course. Okay, so the last scenario, I think, is that an ambulance gets called to a school where a child's having trouble breathing. So right off the bat, it could definitely be a lot of different situations. What are some of the situations that you think it might be? Hang on one second. I'm just going to ask people to raise their hand if they want to participate, and then I'll also check the chat and I will call on you if you raise your hand. Okay, so yep, some people were saying things about the previous one. Some people are saying concussion. Yeah, that's definitely something that could happen. I'll call on Karen.
Maybe seizures.
Yeah, maybe a seizure. I'll go with Eunice and then we'll be done.
It may be allergies.
Yeah, it could be allergies. So it really could be a ton of different things: asthma, pneumonia, trauma to the chest, allergies, or COPD. So again, that's what I think that it could be. And then we want to make sure that if they have any rashes, that we prevent them from going into anaphylactic shock, which is reaction. Okay, so that was the end of the presentation. So if you would all not mind going to this website here, we have a live quiz that we want to run with all of you just to test your knowledge. It's not for marks or anything, it's just for fun. And I'll also send out a poll now that you can answer to get your second part of the attendance for this day's session. So I'm just I'll release that now, but if everyone could go to that website, that would be lovely. And then again, just a reminder that we will be answering questions that you have about the program or anything else at the end of the session.
Where I can get the ball?
All right, so I'm going to launch the poll now. Feel free to answer it before you go over to the website. So the question is super easy. It's just, what was
Where's the
today? And then
where's the website? Where's the website?
All right, so I'm launching the poll now. And for those of you asking where the
Must I
website,
answer the question right or wrong? Easy.
it's just for fun, so you don't have to. There's no pressure to get anything right or anything wrong. And I'm going to go ahead and send the link in the chat now. So it's joinmyquiz.com. I'll go ahead and send that right now. And then I'll share the code with everybody. So I also have another poll that's going up now, so feel free to work on either or both. And then I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started on the quiz. This poll will be up for a couple of minutes and I'll leave it open a little bit past the end of the session too. Also a reminder that our session officially ends at 11 o'clock my time, or whatever the time is, in 4 minutes for all of you. So you can feel free to leave if you don't want to participate in this. Just make sure you've answered the poll and that you, that you answer the poll, and stick around if you have any questions, because I'll be here to answer it. Okay, so you can feel free to join here. Hopefully it loads. Okay, so enter this code once you get to this website. And then I'll go ahead and get started once enough of you have joined. So it's joinmyquiz.com, and then you enter the code 227418.
Show the QR code.
Let me see. Okay, yes. Also scan this at the steps.
Okay,
I will
thanks.
get it now or as a homework.
I'm gonna get started in a second. So. I'll give everyone one sec. Okay, I'm gonna get started now. I'm gonna exit out of the QR code so that I can join, or that I can have people join. Okay. All right, I'm gonna hit the start button. Feel free to get going. Let me stop sharing my screen first. Maybe that will help. Sorry that it's so loud. Okay, a bunch of people are still joining, so I'll give everyone another second.
Sorry, I want to ask a question.
Do you mind waiting till we're done with the interactive? Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so it's live. Feel free to go ahead and answer all the questions there. And then
sorry,
stop live streaming now because we've kind of reached the end of the session. Feel free to keep going and do the interactive, answer all the questions if you'd like. And then as soon as the interactive is done, I'll stick around and answer any questions that you have, okay?